Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of Indian Economy Essentials. And in today's session, let's try and understand whether India is staring at stagflation. Now, many of you would be asking me, sir, why are you discussing the idea of a stagflation now? The reason is very simple. Today's Hindu newspaper, that is dated 20th of March 2023, any edition you open up, there is this article in the central page. That is, there is a concern that there could be a situation of stagflation that might happen. Again, underline the term, might happen, not only in India, in the rest of the world as well. Now, let's try and understand what are the concepts related to this idea of a stagflation. First and foremost, I'm pretty sure all of you heard of Phillips curve. There is this concept of Phillips curve. Now, what is a Phillips curve? Phillips curve represents the relationship between the unemployment rate and inflation rate. I repeat, Phillips curve represents the relationship between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. Now, what kind of a relationship exists between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate here? As per the Phillips curve, the unemployment rate and the inflation rate are inversely related. Right? Again, now you'll ask me, sir, what do you mean by inverse relation? Let me give you a graphical representation. Along the x-axis, let's say you write unemployment rate, UR, and along y-axis, you'll write inflation. Now, if you apply the Phillips curve, what does it say? The relationship between inflation and unemployment rate is inverse, meaning when the inflation rate is high, unemployment rate is low, and when inflation rate is low, unemployment rate is higher. Now, some of you would be confused. You'll simply ask me, sir, how does it happen? Right? How is that when the inflation rate is higher, unemployment rate is lower, and the vice versa? Let's start with a very simple example. Imagine a country is going through recession. What do you mean by recession? Whenever a country for 2 consecutive quarters achieves a negative growth rate, this situation is referred to as a recession. Has India experienced a recession recently? Of course, yes. During pandemic, we have experienced recession. Now, during recession, what happens? During recession, GDP growth rate is negative, which means production of goods and services. The production of goods and services is low. And when the production of goods and services is lower, can I simply say the people will be removed from the jobs? Employees would be removed from the job, which would increase unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is higher, that's a fact now. At the same point of time, even when there is a negative growth rate, production of goods and services is lower, unemployment rate is higher, people are losing jobs, what will be the demand for goods and services? The demand for goods and services would also be lower, which means inflation is also lower. Inflation is lower. So now have a look at this. Unemployment rate is higher, inflation rate is lower. Are they not moving in opposite direction? Are they not moving in different directions here? Of course, yes. So this is how you generally say that in a Phillips curve, both the inflation as well as unemployment rate are inversely related. Now, some of you will say, sir, when inflation is low, unemployment rate is high. I understood that. What about the other side? What about the other side of the equation? How is that when inflation is high, when the inflation is higher, why will the unemployment rate come down? What is the connection? Let's assume, right? Let's start. Whenever there is a high growth rate in the economy, there is a very good demand for goods and services in the market, people are getting jobs, what do you generally see? When people will get the jobs, demand for goods and services is higher, GDP is improving at a very good pace, unemployment rate automatically will start going down, and when people will get the jobs, they will have good amount of money to spend in the market. What will happen to the demand? Demand will start increasing, that will contribute to inflation. That's the reason generally we say inflation and growth rate both are moving together. That is, if there's a very good growth rate being achieved by a country, there is always a danger that there could be inflation that is going to happen in that country. So that is the basic connection between the inflation as well as unemployment rate provided under the Phillips curve. Now this idea of a Phillips curve was given by one of the economists, A.W. Phillips. But many of the experts looked at the Phillips curve and said, this will generally work out in short duration. In short term, this will work out. For example, one of the very famous economists, Milton Friedman, looked at this curve and said, no, there are a lot of problems, inaccuracies with the curve. That is, as per the theory that was put forward by Milton Friedman, the argument was whenever inflation rate and unemployment rate in a short duration, these will move in opposite directions. But if the inflation rate consistently remains higher, if the inflation rate remains higher, inflation will continue to go upwards because there is a concept of inflation expectations. That is, for example, imagine a worker is there, a person is there, there is an expectation based on the experience that inflation is going to remain very high, which means the worker will start demanding more and more amount of salary that will basically contribute to inflation in the market. That's the reason Milton Friedman stated that in short duration this will work out very well, but in the long duration it will not be inverse curve, rather it will be a vertical line like this. That is, inflation will keep on happening, keep on increasing. And that's where, rather than always assuming that inflation higher means unemployment low or lower unemployment, there was a new system introduced, that is the concept of stagflation. The term stagflation for the first time was used by one of the British MP, Iain Macleod, in 1965, when he was providing a speech or giving a speech and said, the Britain or the UK is experiencing the worst of both the worlds. That is, it is experiencing stagnancy in the growth rate. That is, let's say there is a recession, and it is also at the same point of time experiencing higher unemployment rate. Have a look at this. The worst of both the worlds. That is, there is a stagnancy in the growth, or let's say there is a recession that is happening in the economy. At the same point of time, there is also a higher unemployment rate. So whenever a situation in the economy exists, or a country is experiencing a stagnant growth rate, that is, growth rate has got stagnated, or worst case scenario, there is a recession. In addition to this, there is a high unemployment rate as well as a higher inflation rate. This situation is referred to as a stagflation situation. Now, why are we discussing about the idea of a stagflation here? In the recent times, there is a concern regarding higher inflation rates, not only in the domestic market, but also in the international market. For example, USA has been struggling to contain inflation. The target rate for Federal Reserve there, that is the rate at which they want to maintain inflation, is 2%. But they have been struggling with that. What about Britain? Inflation rate many of the times is very high. What about India? Successively in the last 1 year, for majority period of the time, inflation rate has remained above 6%. For the month of November, December 2022, although it cooled down, went below 6%. Again, for the month of January as well as February, I repeat, January as well as February, the inflation rate has gone above 6%. In January, the inflation rate was 6.5%. And in the month of February, the inflation print recorded 6.4%. So, successively, there have been periods of higher inflation rate. So, this is one point. Now, many of you will ask me, sir, agreed, inflation rate is higher. But how is that during a stagflation? Growth rate is not happening, unemployment rate is also low, as well as inflation is also low. How does it happen? Don't you think this is a counter to the idea of Phillips curve? That is exactly what I'm trying to explain here. During stagflation, you will see all of them. Right? You will see higher unemployment rate, higher inflation rate, as well as stagnancy in the growth. Any example of it? Has India experienced stagflation? Answer is yes. Please have a look at the graphical representation here. Check what is the growth rate of Indian economy in 1970s. What is the inflation rate during that period of time? I'll give you a very simple example here. All of you heard of OPEC? Oil producing and exporting countries, OPEC. In the past, the activities of the OPEC have actually caused stagflation in the international market. For example, in 1970s, OPEC decided to change their production strategy. And that is very much relevant for a very simple reason. Just like India, there are many other countries, even in the Western market, who are very much dependent on the import of crude oil from OPEC. Even today, India, more than 80% of the requirement of crude in the domestic market, we import it. So whenever there is a decision that is taken by OPEC which adversely affects us, there is a danger that it could cause inflation in the domestic market. So coming back to the story here, in 1970s, because of certain decisions taken by the OPEC, the crude oil prices shot up. And just like India is today, Western markets at that point of time, including USA, were majorly dependent on import of crude oil from the international market. So when the crude oil prices shot up like this, import prices will go up. It will automatically contribute to inflation. It will automatically contribute to inflation, and it contributed. And when inflation goes up, the cost of transportation will go because the crude oil price has increased now. The cost of various other metals, other inputs will go up. Household consumption would be affected. As a result of this, the issue in the USA snowballed, and this led to stagnant growth, higher inflation, as well as higher unemployment rate. That is stagflation. In the last couple of years, there is a discussion that even India could be facing a situation of stagflation. Now, can I give you one more example here? Let's say government will impose a lockdown. Government will impose a lockdown, which means people are losing jobs, people do not have sufficient amount of money to spend, and GDP at that point of time will be struggling. At the same point of time, what if the crude oil prices will go up? If the crude oil prices will go up, that will basically lead to higher inflation in the domestic market. So on one side, GDP has got stagnated. Second, unemployment rate is very high because there is an impact on the economy. And the third one, inflation rate is also very high. So whenever there is a supply shock inflation that could happen in the international market, that could have an impact and lead to stagflation in various countries around the world. Now the problem with stagflation is, we generally say it is worst of both the worlds. What is the problem with stagflation? In stagflation, we saw that there is a higher inflation rate and growth rate has stalled, or there is an impact on GDP. Whenever inflation rate is higher, what does a central banker do? Central banker will reduce the money supply. But on the other hand, if the central banker will reduce the money supply, what will happen to the GDP? Already there is an impact on GDP. There could be a recession in the economy. Are you not increasing the intensity of the recession? Are you not dragging the economy or pushing the economy towards, let's say, depression? So that's the reason addressing stagflation is very difficult. And when I say this, remember this. There is no universal formula to address stagflation. Many experts have given different viewpoints altogether. And what is applicable to one country may or may not be applicable to other countries. For example, when you talk about, let's say, Paul Krugman, one more very famous economist, or Milton Friedman, they recommended that the central banker should focus on controlling inflation first. If you are supplying a lot of money in the economy, try to control that money supply, try to control, the issue of inflation first. Then allow the private sector to participate in a better way so that the allocation of resources can be done in a better way and employment can be promoted. So that is how you generally try to address the issue of stagflation in a market. Now, based on the discussion, I've given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding stagflation. During stagflation, there is a higher GDP, higher unemployment, and higher inflation rate. Right? No, this statement is wrong. a supply shock may lead to stagflation? And the answer is yes. So second statement is correct. Right option for the question will be the statement second or option B here. So this is a discussion I just wanted to have regarding the issue of stagflation, or let's say the article on stagflation which has appeared in Hindu. And I'm pretty sure all of you know this. In recent times, there is an issue or concern regarding slowdown of growth in the Indian economy. So RBI is now in a dilemma. Should we increase the interest rates? Should we maintain the interest rates? Should we reduce the interest rates in the face of higher inflation rate? Right, so this is the gist of the article provided in the Hindu newspaper on 20th of March 2023. Now, if you like the initiative, please hit the like button. Provide your valuable comments in the section below. And if you yet to subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do it now. Thank you. Have a great day.